The most fundamental fear with any organisation, entrepreneurship or established business is the responsibility you have to other people. And I think that was always a fear that I had, and it's one that still sits with me most days, that ultimately, these people need to be, feel happy and satisfied and purposeful, but also feel well psychologically in order for any of the impact that we want to create in the world to be there. Any good leader has to focus on its people first before anything else. When you're hiring anybody for a startup, particularly in social enterprise, you need people who believe so deeply in the cause, as much as you do, and who will run across hot coals and work long hours and sacrifice much of their lives for a short period of time to get something off the ground. I think the pitfalls of that, generally speaking, for entrepreneurs is they never get out of that gear. So they stay in first gear and over rev to the point where even though they could slow down, they choose not to, and they burn people out, or they run off a cliff that they probably shouldn't have been close to the edge of, because they never get out of first gear. So I think the most profound entrepreneurs that I know that I think are amazing are the ones who fully appreciate and are very self-conscious of the phase of the organisation they're in. You can't be in startup forever, and if you are, you will fail. So it's knowing when to get out of that. And where we've failed, it's been around members of the team not appreciating necessarily what phase we're in. So when we're in a phase of consolidation, they're running it at high energy as if they were in startup. Or when we are growing a new project, people are acting like they're in a phase of stabilization. So it's kind of being clear with that phased approach as a leader, I think gives people a huge roadmap to then work on around how they manage themselves in the organization. I think one of the things that I've always understood, or in a conceptual form, is that the process of business, the how of business, is just as important as the what or the outcome of business. And that's even more important in the social enterprise game than it is in any other startup, because people get very fixated on the outcome. They get fixated on the saving people or the planet or doing some sort of a social good. That's why they get out of bed in the morning. That's why they don't go to bed till late at night, because they're working. I understood in concept that we needed to also focus on the process as much as the outcome, because that's, as I said before, that's people's lives. That's their people's working lives. And if they're not happy in that working life, then it doesn't matter how good the outcome is, you're going to fall over. I understood that in concept form, but the reality of it obviously is a bit of a rude awakening. And when you get it wrong, it goes dramatically wrong, and it's people's lives that are affected. So I think most of my answers here are around people and around taking care of our people, and that's been it's a lifelong lesson, but it's such an important one in social enterprise. There's a hindsight narrative to that question, which is that I don't think I've ever had a good idea that was fully formed and well thought through that hasn't worked. But of course, at the time, you have all sorts of ideas that you think are good in the kind of philosophical sense of the word good, which then fail. The theory here is that you try quickly and you move quickly and you fail fast, and you do that without embarrassment or shame, and you embrace your failures and you go, 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 go. And there's a lot to be said for that methodology, because many good ideas stay in people's heads because they refuse to get out in the world and risk something. Within the School of Life, we try programming ideas all the time that maybe don't come off or don't sell very well. We tried to do a range of events around sport in the latter half of last year, because I feel really strongly that there's a connection between the role of sport in Australian culture and our inability to kind of live emotionally nuanced lives. And I felt like that was something that we could really fly with. But of course, our existing audience at the School of Life isn't that audience. It's about a new audience. And so to do that work would have required basically starting a new organisation within the School of Life that was focusing on that. And so we did a few test balloons and we tried a few events, and they were moderately successful. But I think the learning from that was that, yes, that's an important area of work that we need to think about. And I can think about that in terms of, I guess, the broader narrative of impact that I want to have. But the School of Life may not be the best pathway or the best portal to have that conversation. It's less about the idea being good or bad and more about how deeply you've actually thought about that concept. there's a need to be deeply thoughtful and reflective about the work that we're doing, because it's not enough just to add more projects to the world. The challenges that we face are way too large for that. And so I think, again, thinking about what a good entrepreneur looks like, I think they're also a good philosopher. They're also a good thinker. They're also a good analyst, not just a doer. They're not just the person who goes out there and gets stuff done. The new leaders of the new economy need to be the ones that can actually process complex problems and articulate them into a thesis about how they want the world to work. What does a good society look like? Rather than simply charge after one little idea and expect people to connect the dots. If your narrative around what you want to achieve in the world as a social entrepreneur is a relatively large one, it doesn't mean that you can't be focused in concept or project. Like we all know that a business or an organization will fail without quite a coherent, succinct and focused narrative. Like we need to have that to lead an organization. So for the School of Life, our narrative is we're trying to develop emotional intelligence with people, and we're using culture to do that. That's kind of it. That's the be all and end all of what we do. So in the past, I think entrepreneurs are great at the first 3 years, and then they build and sell or build and give to somebody else and move on to the next project. I feel like it's important to have a narrative that sits between them for me, and a narrative that connects the projects. That's the only way I feel like I'm creating significant or sustainable impact in the world. Organizations on their own won't do that. There are very few organizations globally that are having deep impact on their own. And I think there are basically very few in Australia that do that too. So I feel like we need to build an ecosystem of projects that are interacting with one another that can then achieve some sort of a greater theory of change.